Thank you, Mr. Marquis. A vision statement and a mission statement represent what an organization hopes to achieve and the way that it intends to operate. At Yongsan International School of Seoul, we're a community of students and parents and Christian educators working together to instill in each student a passion for truth, a commitment to excellence, and an appreciation for diversity. If we're committed to instilling these characteristics in the students that we serve, then we ourselves must also be committed to these things. Being committed to excellence doesn't necessarily mean that you are excellent, but rather that you're doing the best that you can do in any moment, and you're constantly pursuing being better than you are. In the context of a school, in the context of education, this means that we're continually seeking to bring our teaching practices and our programmatic structures into better alignment with what we know about how students learn and develop. It means that we are pursuing and adopting the best practices in education. Decades of research has taught us how to optimize learning. We know that learning is optimized when it's applied. This means that it's designed to provide learners with an immersive and an interactive experience that allows them to actively engage with the subject matter. We know that learning is optimized when it's challenging, when the task or the activity is challenging enough to promote growth and development, but not so difficult that the child becomes overly frustrated or overwhelmed. And we know that learning is optimized when it's collaborative. We know that learning is optimized when it's conceptual and when it's inquiry-based, such that it can be driven by a child's own curiosity, and the teachers and the students can have meaningful questions that drive their investigations, and when the learning experience is taken into account and built upon the interests of individual students to make it fun. We know that students need to be in a safe environment to be able to succeed. That's not just a physically safe environment, but also an emotionally and an intellectually safe environment where students feel that they can take intellectual risks. Being free to take those intellectual risks helps to nurture the development of a growth mindset in children. A growth mindset is where they understand that their intelligence and their capability aren't fixed, but they can develop through successive iterations of mistakes, followed by corrections and improvements. And we understand that learning is most effective when it's meaningful and goes beyond simply achieving good grades. And this includes incorporating important life skills such as empathy and compassion, which are essential for personal growth and development. We know that learning is optimized when teachers engage in all these practices in ways that honor a student's own ideas and creative thinking. Our great teachers are striving to incorporate learning activities that embody these practices and engage your child in learning that's deep and long-lasting. This is how we teach. But of course, there's a question of what we teach. We've adopted several standard sets that have been well-researched and are widely recognized across the United States, and which also drive the instruction at most American curriculum international schools around the world. These standards include the Common Core for math and English, the C3 framework for social studies, the NGSS for science, and different standard sets for our physical education, our arts, our world language, and our technology programs. These standard sets drive the learning goals that each grade level in each subject and each of our classes. The learning which is facilitated by all the best practices that I mentioned previously is guided by these content standards. We encourage our teachers to use whatever resources and methods they need to ensure that every child achieves proficiency in the skills and the content knowledge that are defined by these standards. By using the standards as our guide, we have developed a highly articulated kindergarten through 12th grade program that's college preparatory for our demographic, the vast majority of whom will be attending universities in the United States. And this is really what the core of standards-based learning is all about. It's about using a well-defined educational program with clear, articulated learning objectives, and then letting teachers use research-based best practices to help each child optimize their learning, achieve proficiency in the content, knowledge, and skills that's defined by those learning targets. The movement towards standards-based learning at YISS has been ongoing since at least 2016, when our school established its implementation and the associated grading practices as one of its goals in the continuous school improvement plan, which is monitored as part of the school's accreditation process. The school's recent accreditation visit in March included an evaluation of our progress towards this goal. And while several new goals have been established for 2023 and beyond, the implementation of standards-based learning, grading, and reporting remains a priority at our school. Our vision is to continue advancing the best practices associated with standards-based learning, providing ongoing professional development and training opportunities for our teachers to refine and improve their practices further. And by doing so, we aim to make YISS the best K-12 learning experience for our students. For 2023 and beyond, we'll continue to pursue our standards-based learning model and the associated practices that stem from the idea that our classroom instruction should be driven by clearly defined and articulated learning targets. Of course, this naturally leads to the question of how we communicate learning and progress to students, parents, and the other stakeholders in a meaningful and effective way that aligns with our standards-based approach. And this is where we transition from the idea of standards-based learning generally to standards-based grading specifically. And in doing so, we have to start with a fundamental question. What are grades? More precisely, what do grades mean? Are they a measure of learning or a reflection of effort? Do they provide a comparison from one student to the next? If so, what kind of comparison? If you were told that one student had an A in a class and another student had a B in the same class, and that was the only information that you had, what could you say with confidence is the difference between those two students? Are grades motivators? They're surely tools for college admissions to some extent, but to what extent? What are grades? Well, let's consider that question. What are grades and what do they mean? Let's consider this with a specific example from our high school. In this example, a student earned a 90% in Calculus 1, which translates using the scale that we have decided upon, which, by the way, is not the same at every other high school. It translates to a B in our system. But what does a B really mean? Does a B mean that the student actually absorbed 90% of the instruction that was presented in that class? Or is there somewhere incorporated in there a reflection of the student's effort? Did the student really do well on all the tests, so they actually know all the content very well? However, maybe they're just very disorganized, and so they were late in turning in homework and didn't turn it in. Or is it the case that the student doesn't actually know all the material, but they were actually really good with turning in homework? And if that were the case, what's the nature of the homework? Did the teacher give a whole bunch of homework assignments where the student was able to simply go home and copy down a few problems, turn it in, and then still get full credit for the homework? Was it a completion grade? Was it all or nothing? What are grades? To delve a little bit deeper into this question and shed light on why so many schools are transitioning away from traditional grades and towards proficiency-based grading systems, I'd like to share a short video that explains the challenges of a very traditional style of grading. It shows how traditional grading is not only inaccurate at times, but also fails to capture the full picture of a student's learning.
So what really is encapsulated in that one single letter grade that summarizes the entire learning experience of that student in that class? I'd like to dig into that a little bit deeper with some very specific examples. In this example, I have two students, student A and student B, and you can see from their final grade, which for student A is 82.15% and for student B is 82.10%. They have the same letter grade, which is a C+, as determined by the grading scale that we currently use here at Yongsan International School of Seoul. If you look at the differences between the scores that student A received for assignments, quizzes, tests, projects, and the scores that student B received for assignments, quizzes, tests, and projects, they're quite different. Student A has earned full marks, 100% for every homework assignment that's given. Student B, on the other hand, apparently never turns in a homework assignment on time. There are also differences in test performance. So for example, if we look at the scores for student A on tests, the first test is a 72% and the second test is 60%. Whereas for student B, they received an almost perfect score on the first test and a very high score of 96 on the second test. If the question were to be asked, which of these two students understands the content better? It's probably that most people would say that it's more likely that student B actually understands the material better than student A. Now, another interesting to notice is that both students received a 92% on that final project. Imagine for a moment that this particular teacher set up this project so that it was a group project, and whatever the score was, both students received the same score. Based on the other grades that are displayed by student A and student B, what's the likelihood that both of those students contributed equally in all ways to the final grade on that project? This example is precisely what a very traditional grading structure is like. There's a whole host of things that get encapsulated into a final letter grade at the end. Are there better ways of more accurately communicating the learning that's taking place in the classroom? Perhaps. What if we were to break out the components of a class that are primarily formative in nature? Formative means things like homework assignments that are primarily intended just to be learning experiences, but not actually to be reflective of the final knowledge or the final skill level of a student once they've reached the expected proficiency level. Let's use student B as an example here. If we separate out those things that we call summative and those things that we call formative, the three right-handmost columns, now we again see the scores for student B on assignments, which are in red, quizzes, which are in blue, and tests and projects, which are the summative evaluations, the most significant evaluations. In doing so, we can see that the students' summative assessments are significantly higher than their performance on formative assessments. And these can still be aggregated into a final grade for the class. But at the same time, being able to disaggregate these scores in this way does provide us more information. But what about those formative evaluations? That score itself is actually something that incorporates both quizzes and homework assignments. Is there additional information that can be gleaned in structuring things a little bit differently still? If we separate out the quizzes and the assignments, we can see that the formative grade is actually heavily skewed towards assignments. If we're to take the tests, the quizzes, and the projects as the kinds of things which are most likely to provide the most accurate representation of the learning that's occurring in the class, then we get a significantly higher final grade for the student. But let's take this one step further. Let's look at another student in the same class. This student also has a C, which again, based on the scale that we've defined here at Yongsan International School of Seoul, is what this student's 82% amounts to. We can break down this grade into summative assessments and formative assessments. But rather than doing that, you could also consider that within any given subject, there's different kinds of things that are being assessed. That is, there's different areas of knowledge and different areas of skill within that particular subject or course. For example, in an ELA class, two of the large area of knowledge or skill that are taught and assessed are speaking and writing. They're certainly related, which is why they're both taught in the same class, but they're not assessed the same way because they are two different cognitive domains within the same subject. If we had knowledge about whether or not a student is struggling in one area over another, we could use that information to help guide instruction for the student. Let's consider that student C is in an ELA class. Perhaps it might be the case the first quiz and the first test that student took in that class were focused on speaking skills, whereas the second quiz, third quiz, and the second test and the final project were all assessing the student's ability to write effectively. It's possible to consider these different cognitive domains within the subject separately and produce individual scores for each of those domains. In doing so, we can see that the student happens to be a far better writer than they are a speaker. This is something that is not clearly communicated when we aggregate the information into a single letter grade. We could take it one step further by not just separating out the cognitive domains and evaluating them independently. We could separate out the summative assessments from the formative ones to get a much fuller picture, a fuller profile of this student as a learner. This profile is more communicative to the teacher to guide instruction they provide, to the student to help them understand their strengths and their areas where they should focus their efforts, and to the parent to be more fully informed as they also help their child in the learning process.
So what are grades? The big takeaway here is that a tremendous number of variables are aggregated into a single letter grade, often resulting in that letter grade communicating very inaccurately about the actual learning that's taking place in any particular course. There's always ways of reporting and learning outcomes that can be improved to make the grades that teachers give more accurate and more communicative about the extent and the breadth of learning that's taken place, as well as the nature of the student as a learner. So what are grades? What do they mean? Depending on how we structure the grading and reporting, they could mean a little or they could mean a lot. They could be measurements of learning. They could be reflections of efforts, comparisons to others, motivators, tools for college admissions. Grades can be all sorts of things. However, there are ways to structure the way that we report grading to improve how they reflect the learning that's taking place in the classroom And that's the core principle behind standards-based grading. Standards-based grading is rooted in the understanding that an aggregated grade often fails to capture the full picture of a student's learning or their capabilities as a learner. This approach seeks to structure the grades and grade reporting in ways that provide a more accurate and comprehensive assessment of a student's progress towards specific targets or standards. By reflecting the level of proficiency a student has reached in achieving those targets, grades in a standards-based grading system can better represent a student's overall performance and growth. In fact, our elementary school has been implementing standards-based grading very effectively for several years, as evidenced by the current report cards. On the elementary school report card, you can see that there are multiple standards reported by domain, and each standard's proficiency is given an indicator of 1, 2, or 3. In addition, at the elementary school level, the characteristics of successful learners are also reported. These characteristics of successful learners are non-academic character traits that are essential for students to develop as they progress in their learning journey and that can help them facilitate learning. At the middle school level, there's been significant progress towards reporting structures that do align with the principles of standards-based grading, although not to the same extent as the elementary school. Within Schoology, specific standards are not articulated in the same way as in the elementary school. Instead, just the reporting domains are used. For example, in a language arts class, 4 reporting domains are used: language, reading comprehension, speaking and listening, and writing. Although there are several specific standards identified by the Common Core state standards within these domains that are encompassed within these domains, student achievement on those standards is aggregated within these domains at the middle school level. Characteristics of successful learners are also reported in Schoology at the middle school level. It's possible to expand the reporting domains to see individual assignments and whether they're formative or summative. And it's worth noting that the middle school still uses a traditional percentage scale, which is then translated into a level of proficiency within those domains. However, the level of information on the middle school report card is limited as it currently produces an aggregated grade for each course using a traditional percentage and letter grade format. Nevertheless, the characteristics of successful learners are displayed on the report cards. And then we have the structure of the high school report card as it currently exists. To date, the high school has not adopted a reporting structure typically associated with standards-based learning or standards-based grading. Every single variable about a student and the way that they learn, what they've learned, is encapsulated in a single aggregated letter grade. Yongsan International School of Seoul is committed to excellence. And in so being, we're committed to bringing our teaching practices and programmatic structures into better alignment. This means that at all levels, whether in elementary, middle, or high school, our teachers are expected to provide learning opportunities that are in line with best practices. Our teachers are working hard to create learning experiences that are applied, challenging, collaborative, conceptual, inquiry-based, and personalized, all within safe environments that promote the development of growth mindsets in students. Our teachers are also expected to use standards such as the NGSS, the Common Core State Standards, the C3, National Core Arts Standards to guide their instruction and their assessments. They must effectively communicate to the students the knowledge and the skills required to demonstrate proficiency in the content and then align assessments accordingly. This process helps to ensure that our students are receiving high-quality instruction and have a clear understanding of what's expected of them. One of the ways that our teachers ensure alignment with standards-based learning principles is through the development of proficiency scales. These scales outline the criteria that students need to meet to demonstrate proficiency on specific learning targets. For example, a Common Core ELA standard might be identified, and then a proficiency scale would articulate the necessary criteria for students to meet that learning target. Here's an example of how a teacher has actually developed an entire unit where activities are skillfully scaffolded at varying levels of challenge and then aligned with the levels of a proficiency scale. In structuring a unit this way, students are able to embark on a learning journey of activities that build skills and knowledge successively until they're engaged in activities that provide them with the opportunity to fully demonstrate the skills and content that's defined by the standard. Proficiency scales allow teachers to communicate the necessary criteria that a student has to meet in order to be considered proficient for a learning target. For example, a high school English teacher might use a proficiency scale such as this one that assesses progress towards a major ELA standard. It might be that a particular standard is quite complex and there's a lot to it. And then in that case, the teacher might choose to evaluate student proficiency on the standard using multiple smaller assessments. If a student can satisfactorily demonstrate that they know the knowledge or are competent in the skills that are described by the standard, they're assessed as proficient, which in the scale here is a level 3. If they can demonstrate knowledge or skills that are associated with a level 4, then they're evaluated as a 4. In this example, you'll notice that a component of the standard has both a level 3 and a level 4 articulated. Specifically, in this case, the differentiating factor between a level 4 and a level 3 is the student's ability to use complex syntax and ideas. So when a teacher is designing an assessment, they would incorporate opportunities for students to demonstrate those levels of proficiency on the assessment. Let's examine what this would look like in Schoology. Here we have a Schoology course that's set up to demonstrate what this would look like from a student's perspective. Currently, we're looking at the student view of grades of the grades section in their Schoology course. Notice that all the green values are on a 4-point scale. Notice also that the characteristics of successful learners will also appear in Schoology, which actually started at the beginning of our current school year. And it is also worth noting that the characteristics of successful learners do not contribute to the overall semester grade. In addition to the characteristics of successful learners, the 3 academic domains associated with this particular course are displayed. This example is a high school science course, and the 3 domains are disciplinary core ideas, scientific skills and practices, and communicating conclusions and arguing from evidence. It's worth noting that our goal is to have similar or identical reporting domains within each department as much as possible. For instance, all of our standard science classes use the same set of NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards, which serve as the basis for the reporting domains. Courses within our Fine Arts department would use responding, creating, and performing as their domains. Those domains are derived from the structure of the National Council for the Arts standards. ELA classes would typically use reading, writing, speaking, and listening as their domains, which are derived from the Common Core standards, etc. And this brings what's called, in the education world, horizontal and vertical program alignment. That facilitates consistent content, instructional strategies, and assessment practices within a grade level or a subject area across multiple grade levels. So in this case, a student receives not one aggregated grade in Schoology, but they actually have 3 grades, 1 grade for each of those reporting domains, each of the domains of understanding. We can now expand each of these domains and see that the various assignments, quizzes, and tests that the teacher would use in order to make an evaluation of the student's level of proficiency within that domain. It's important to note that every entry in the gradebook is indicated on a 1 through 4 scale. The 1, 2, 3, and 4 indicate the level of proficiency that the student has attained on that assessment as defined by the learning criteria of that assessment. In this model, teachers do have some flexibility in determining if certain assessments in their class should have a greater weight in the calculation of a final grade within that domain. There's various reasons why this might be the case. For example, a teacher might want to give a homework assignment and then provide feedback to the student in the form of a level of proficiency, but not have the assignment count towards the student's final grade. In this case, such an assignment could be recorded in Schoology in the gradebook and be given a weight of 0 so that it does not count towards the final calculation of the domain grade for that student. Similarly, it might be that a teacher provides multiple small quizzes leading up to a final assessment. It would make sense that these small quizzes, which evaluate smaller portions of learning leading up to a larger assessment that is supposed to be more comprehensive, would be weighted less in the final calculation of the domain grade. In this example, we can see that quizzes are indicated with a value of 0.5 in parentheses next to the name of the assignment. And this means that the quizzes are weighted at half the value of tests, which are weighted at the standard value of 1 in this particular example. Let's briefly revisit the concept of formative and summative assessments. There's really no clear-cut distinction between them. Every type of evaluation that teacher gives can serve both as a summary of learning and also as a tool for guiding instruction and setting learning goals, with formative and summative assessments really existing on a spectrum rather than as a strict dichotomy. And this model also accounts for that reality. However, with the proliferation of artificial intelligence software and the increasing ease with which technology can be used by students to complete various tasks, it's increasingly difficult for a teacher to consider anything that's completed outside of the classroom as particularly reliable as a piece of evidence from which to make a reasonable judgment of a student's proficiency. And so it makes sense then that small homework assignments that were previously counted as done or not done, those are no longer considered as something that contributes to the overall grade in a class. That's not to say that completing homework isn't important. It is. However, the value of homework is in preparing students for more accurate and reliable assessments, and therefore the benefits of homework should become apparent in scores on other assessments. Additionally, if completion of homework is something that we value to be credited for effort, there are other ways of accounting for that, such as the characteristics of successful learners. In this model, each subject area will have between 2 and 4 domains that are correlated with the standards for that course. A student's proficiency of the skills and content knowledge associated with the domain will be determined by using the weighted average proficiency scores of the assessments that are within those domains. In this example, 1 grade per domain communicates much more information about the student than a single aggregated letter grade would. For example, this student demonstrates exemplary understanding of the disciplinary core ideas in science, but also has a weakness in their ability to take those core ideas, those factual bits of information, the knowledge, and form it into a cohesive argument as indicated by their score in the domain number 3, which is communicating conclusions and arguing from evidence. This score is below the proficiency level that would be expected and suggests that the students need to improve in this area. In this model, an overall course grade is still produced in addition to the individual grades for each domain within the course. The final course grade is calculated by taking a weighted average of every assessment that the student has taken, not just the average of each domain. This allows for the fact that some domains may have more assessments and so therefore carry more weight in the overall grade. For example, if a student spends more time working on and being assessed in the skills and the content associated with one domain more than another, it would make sense that that domain contributes more heavily to the overall grade. Allowing the weights of the domains to develop naturally over the course of a semester, as opposed to predetermining the weights of the domains, has some advantages. Firstly, it ensures that the assessment process is flexible and it allows the teachers to make appropriate adjustments to the course based on the progress of the students. This also helps to ensure that the final grade is more reflective of the actual performance of the students rather than being skewed by the influence of predetermined weights of the domains. This kind of problem is actually very acute in our current system, where we have pre-weighted formative assessments to be 30% of a grade and summative assessments to be worth 70% at the beginning of a semester. Depending on the number of assessments or assignments given in one or the other of those categories and their lopsidedness, it's currently very possible that a single assignment or assessment could have an influence on a student's final grade in the course that's very non-representative of the learning that's actually taken place. Dynamic weighting helps in part to address this issue. The current report card formats at our school vary significantly between elementary, middle, and high school. And while there are valid developmental reasons for this, as a K-12 institution, we believe that alignment of practices can enhance our program, including report card formatting. Next year, the plan is to roll out report cards in each of the divisions that will be very similar in structure. This will help align our reporting structures with our standards-based learning practices, as well as our assessment and our evaluation practices. The report cards for all 3 divisions will have a common heading space that includes the typical school academic seal, the demographic data, and school information. And then each of the 3 report cards will consist of the classes, or in the elementary school, the subjects that are taught. This structure will make the report cards substantially longer, with many more pages than what currently exists. However, the ability to provide more detailed information about student performance justifies the length. And this is especially true considering our school's policy to not distribute paper report cards. We only do it in digital format. So there's no concern about paper consumption. Focusing specifically on the high school report card and in the header section, we have all the typical demographic information that's found on our current report cards, such as student ID, student name, gender, grade, homeroom, days present, days absent. At the high school level, the header section of the report will differ from the elementary and middle schools, and that it will contain cumulative data such as report averages and credits earned and accumulated and cumulative GPA. The remainder of the body of the report will consist of course reports that are stacked on top of each other. Each course that a student takes during a semester will have its own section on the report. Those sections will consist of 3 subsections, the first being the display of the students' evaluations of characteristics of successful learners. At YISS, we consider nurturing our students' character to be one of our highest callings. And so we believe that having these evaluations feature prominently on the report card for each course is indicative of this belief, and it's in alignment with our efforts to communicate more accurately and holistically the profile of our students. With these evaluations of characteristics of successful learners prominently on the report cards, the numbered comments, however, as they currently exist, will be removed. The new report cards will have a space for each course where a teacher can produce a specific narrative comment that will be displayed on the report in those instances when that teacher feels that there's a key piece of information that's worthwhile to be included. The third component of each course-specific section of the report will be the final grade for students in that course, displayed as an average weight of the students' demonstrated proficiency levels on all assessments in the course. These values will, in turn, be used to calculate the cumulative GPA for the students. Notice in the example that's shown that the student's cumulative GPA is higher than 4. This is possible because AP classes will retain the higher GPA weighting that we have in our current system. Now, schools have implemented proficiency-based grading practices around the world in a variety of different ways. They use a variety of different processes to translate proficiency scores to GPAs and then ultimately to cumulative GPAs. The Marzano Group, which is one of the most widely respected educational research institutions, has presented as an example using bands to convert letter grades, which are then converted to a GPA using a very traditional method. Many schools have adopted this approach. Many schools have modified this approach to fit their particular demographic and school profile. And some schools have done away with letter grades or cumulative GPAs altogether. The key takeaway here is that every school has unique factors that justify implementing a distinct approach to converting proficiency scores to cumulative GPAs. In fact, even with traditional letter grades, there's always been a variety of methods and scales that schools use to determine cumulative GPAs. A's, B's, C's, D's have never meant the same thing from one to the next. For example, a B earned at Yongsan International School may be equal to or better than an A that's earned at a host of other schools. Similarly, an A at YISS may not be better than a simple pass that's given to students at Phillips Exeter Academy in Andover during their freshman year. We're committed to ensuring that the particular implementation of proficiency-based grading that occurs at YISS is appropriate for our school and our community. While we could simply adopt an approach used by other schools, there may be valid reasons why such an approach might not be quite the right fit for our teachers, or most importantly, for our students. And so we're carefully evaluating and we're tailoring our approach to best meet the needs of our whole community. During third quarter of this school year, a group of teachers in the high school began piloting this system with their classes. While continuing to provide grades to their students in a customary fashion, these teachers have also been running parallel gradebooks behind the scenes using a proficiency-based system. At the beginning of fourth quarter, all high school teachers were given access to one of these types of proficiency-based gradebooks in Schoology, and they now have the opportunity to similarly run parallel-style gradebooks using proficiency-based scoring practices. As the fourth quarter of the school year progresses, the data from this work will be collected, analyzed, and used to identify any unique circumstances arising from our particular assessment practices and policies. And if needed, we'll refine the process used to develop GPA conversions in a manner that's appropriate for our school and our community. Now, of course, one of the most frequently asked questions whenever any sort of change is made to the structure or the grading practices or the assessment practices at a school, regardless of whether it's associated with standards-based grading or not, is, will this change impact college admissions? And so to begin to answer that question, Mr. Joon Myong, who's our Director of High School Counseling, can provide a few insights.
Thank you, Dr. Wilcox. I know one of the main concerns as YISS transitions to standard-based learning and grading is how such a change may impact college admissions. I want to let you know that as the Director of Counseling here, have been talking with many of the college admissions people from the US and other countries about the pending change in our grading system. And the response is almost identical from every one of them, that they work with different grading systems and scales from all over the world, and they can identify quality of students regardless. That is their full-time job, to decipher any student records we give them. To help the admissions officers, our office will be working on the best ways to notify and inform all colleges about the changes in the transcripts, in the high school profile, which we send along with every transcript, and in our counselor reference letters. The last thing I can say is this. Most of you who know the counselors here probably know that we are truly avid advocates for our students. We believe that standard-based learning is the best thing for our students and their learning. And we believe that this will not negatively impact our students' college outcomes. If we feared this, we would not be supportive of the change. And if you have any questions, just let us know and we'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Further supporting Mr. Myong's firsthand experiences with working with university admissions officers is the fact that standards-based learning and proficiency-based grading is not new. And in fact, it's increasingly common in both public and private schools. There's a number of states that have laws and/or guidance specifically for proficiency-based grading at the high school level. Some states actually require it, while others just provide guidance. Even in the states where proficiency-based grading is not required, there are large, well-respected public school districts that have implemented standards-based grading and proficiency-based high school diplomas. Additionally, there are hundreds of schools that are part of what's known as the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is a group of schools pursuing the adoption of transcripts that are proficiency-based, and in some cases do away completely with traditional grading structures, including the cumulative GPA altogether. This consortium includes a number of very well-respected and prestigious schools, such as Choate Rosemary Hall, Phillips Academy Andover, and Pomfret, among others. So given the increased prevalence of proficiency-based high school diplomas worldwide and the number of well-respected secondary institutions in the United States and around the world that have adopted proficiency-based grading or are moving in that direction, we're confident that college admissions officers will recognize that when they receive an application from a YISS student, they're receiving an application from a student who has attended a school that's serious about learning and communicating that learning in the most accurate and effective way possible. So this brings us back to the idea of what grades are and what they mean. Grades are all of these things to one extent or another, but first and foremost, grades should be, insofar as it is possible, an accurate reflection of the learning that's taking place in the classroom as it pertains to the learning targets that we say we are teaching in our school. Our school started down this journey of standards-based grading because its leadership recognized that the traditional grading system simply doesn't communicate student learning with as much accuracy as it could or convey the nature of your child as a learner as it should. We can do better. At the same time, we recognize that our school is just one school within a larger system of education, and there are certain constraints that make it incumbent upon us to set policies and practices that can be implemented with integrity. YISS is a community of students, parents, and Christian educators working together to instill in each student a passion for truth, a commitment to excellence, and an appreciation for diversity. As part of our commitment to excellence, we strive to implement the best practices in teaching and learning, assessment, and creating cohesive, well-articulated progressions from kindergarten through graduation in all of our divisions. While we have 3 divisions, we are one school, and it's our belief that alignment between these 3 divisions that is developmentally appropriate in the way that we teach, assess, and report provides a better overall learning experience for our students. We hope you do too. Thank you.